there's a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a greener world, it's more than a movement, it's our mission. There are extraordinary gardens, and then there is Chanticleer. Located about 30 minutes outside of Philadelphia, Chanticleer is, in the opinion of anyone whose opinion truly matters in the gardening world, one of the most breathtaking botanical gardens on Earth. Set on 35 acres, the original house and grounds are on the National Register of Historic Places. The gardens are divided into 7 distinct areas, each with its own unique feel and design, but all coming together cohesively to create a spectacular sensory experience that stays with you long after you leave the gates. Plant lovers make it a point of visiting public gardens wherever their travels take them. I know I do. And for any gardener that loves a natural setting, a trip to Gibbs Garden here just north of Atlanta or Chanticleer just outside of Philadelphia is a must-see on any gardener's bucket list. But today's show is not so much about a place as it is a person. 2 people, actually. The first has spent nearly a quarter of a century at Chanticleer, making it a beautiful place for plant lovers to visit. And the other has spent a lot of time teaching him a thing or two about what really makes a garden. Much, much more.
It was just before graduation, and I answered effectively a lawn cutting position at a place called Mount Cuba, crazy name for a garden. It turned out to be one of the foremost gardens in the area for native plants. 6 years later, I left as the Woods Path gardener at Mount Cuba for a job in the commercial sector. I got exactly what I was after: more money, more control, but then I realized that it was at the cost of about a 70-hour work week. And plants then became a commodity. And only when I left public horticulture did I realize how much I enjoyed public horticulture. It was 24 and a half years ago that I had the luxury of interviewing at this place called Chanticleer. Chris Woods, the first director of Chanticleer, was trying to assemble a team to build one of the foremost botanic gardens, public gardens in the world. And I was willing to hitch myself to his star for a little bit because I just want to get out of the nursery and back to a public garden. I'm still there and I love every minute of it. So my primary areas of responsibility at Chanticleer are the entrance courtyards. They're vitally important because it's the first and last impression that a visitor gets at Chanticleer. I take that responsibility very seriously. They're small, confined spaces. They're intimate and yet magical at the same time. They're where a guest is transported from their normal world into our theatrical world for about 2 hours. And it's that portal that they enter the garden through. So it's important to have it right every time, every day, and as best we can.
As one of 6 horticulturalists on staff, Dan Benarsic is almost entirely responsible for his little piece, from the design to the plant choices to the daily maintenance. He's encouraged to push the boundaries, to try new things, to look to outside inspiration, to always keep his part of the garden exciting and fresh. But the standards at Chanticleer are exceptionally high, And Dan knows that he also has a responsibility to not go too far off the rails.
I do have certain restrictions here at Chanticleer that I don't have at home, but the fact is they're more perceived restrictions, and it's the architecture, it's the definition of space, it's walls, it's courtyards, it's a historic property. So I have the opportunity to work in that context. I can't knock down a wall or dismantle a courtyard if I want to do something different. So rather than feeling confined or restrained by these restrictions, I use it as a challenge. Some people may say that English ivy growing on a wall is almost a double challenge or a restriction. I actually think of it as a wonderful dark green background, for example, those yellow cutleaf sambucus.
Yeah.
Look how it pops off that dark wall right there. Further down, a wonderful mature climbing hydrangea. Delightful plant, but when you let it climb up on that wall, you can reveal those lower stems and shows that secondary beauty of that plant. So like I say, I don't see these as challenges or restrictions. I see them as obstacles to overcome and really invoke that creativity. So as we step up to the teacup courtyard, again, architecturally defined space, even the center bed is defined clearly. Some people would say it's limiting. Well, sure it is, but look what I choose to use, the plants that spill out over the lines and soften that. I like to use some of those plants that actually misbehave in these clearly confined spaces.
Touring Chanticleer and Dan's area in particular, taking in what sometimes feels like a chaotic mix of plant textures and crazy colors, but knowing it's all part of a master plan. I couldn't help but wonder what Dan's own landscape must look like. It turns out, despite the botanical wonderland he's created at work, Dan struggled when he got his first yard.
I'm courageous at work with my designs and my installations. I was terrified at home. But slowly, being a plant lover, plants followed me home from work, from my different jobs, side work and the like. It was daunting, but I wasn't in any kind of a race to fill the garden. Things just evolved organically, and that's why it's still to this day such a comfortable garden for me.
As any gardener knows, sometimes what you plant ends up growing into a surprise that you never expected. That's how Peggy Ann Montgomery came into the picture.
She was a PR and marketing person at a large nursery, and I was a gardener looking for plants. She wanted to place those plants in our garden so they could be photographed and noted by the garden writers when they visited. And so we struck up a really good relationship based on plants and sharing plants, and we gelled.
And it wasn't until much, much later that we were at a conference in Portland, and we realized that we were both single, and that it might be kind of fun to try to go on a date, and we did. I think I was introduced into gardening at a really young age. My mom was an avid gardener. We had a pond and beautiful lilacs, and I always enjoyed helping her. I even won a little garden contest, I think, when I was about 8. And I kind of thought of gardening, I think, kind of as a hobby, and I sort of drifted away from it until much later when I moved to Holland, and I had the opportunity to go to school there and study horticulture. They needed horticulturists, and so they would pay for my school and give me a stipend to live on. So after I learned how to speak Dutch, which took a couple years, I went to school there for 4 years and apprenticed for 4 years. I worked for arborists, I worked for a landscape crew, I worked for the city. I had all these different kinds of experiences, which was amazing. Just shows you what a wide subject horticulture can be.
The new couple had plenty in common with their mutual love of plants. But for the relationship to progress, Dan knew he'd have to share more than dinner dates and talking shop. He'd have to share the garden he'd spent so long tending by himself.
We met later in life, and I think when you are at this point in your life, winning battles isn't the most important thing. So when I opened my garden to her, There weren't battles. We worked in the garden together. The best way I can describe sharing a garden with a treasured person, a soulmate, my Peggy, it's intimacy. I do this at Chanticleer in the public realm, and I try to connect people to gardens by letting them experience something special, a feeling, a moment in the garden. But I carry that home as well. We're in tune with each other in the garden.
Oh, you're gonna make me tear up. When you have your own garden and you're so passionate, to be able to open that up to somebody else is the most generous thing in the world. And he wasn't just talking the talk. He made me believe it was mine.
We have to be together in the garden, and I couldn't imagine it any other way, really.
But that doesn't mean that Peggy Ann and Dan approach the garden the exact same way. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And that, they both say, is what makes it work so perfectly.
You know, I think Dan and I are really different gardeners. You know, the kind of work they do at Chanticleer is fine gardening. They have the talent, the time, and the money to do everything just right. I come more from a nursery background, and I'm a little rougher with plants, to tell you the truth. If I'm mowing the lawn and something is, you know, hanging out over the path, I mow it down. Dan would move it. And so I think that's the difference.
I would say the best way to describe this garden before Peggy was a haphazard collection of plants. I've mentioned before that I'm a plantaholic, a plant geek. I like plants, all different types of plants, and put them in the garden in what I thought was a meaningful way. The fact of the matter is it was a jumbled collection of onesies and twosies. Enter Peggy and enter continuity. She multipled, she swept, she increased herbaceous layers where I had none. She brought a life and a continuity to the garden that before was just a collection of plants.
I love Dan's design aesthetic. I think what I've brought to it maybe is more of the detail, bringing things more together, maybe putting some finishing touches on things.
I love forms, textures, contrasts, complementing textures, masses, the bones of the garden. And I often forget about the details of the garden.
So that works out really well, actually, because that's the part I love. I love detail. I like weeding and annuals and perennials and smaller plants and shrubs. So I think that we really fill each other on well.
And so Dan's garden became Dan and Peggy Ann's garden, with both of their personalities on display in full bloom. But despite the years of experience in the botanical world at the highest level, it all comes down to the foundations: good gardening techniques, time-honored growing practices, and fundamental design concepts that anyone can put to use in their own landscapes.
The bit of advice that I would give to people to really enjoy their own space, whatever their own space is, a deck, a patio, a new property, is to learn it, is to live it, is to spend time in it before you make a move. See where the sun travels. See what sounds occur. What are you looking to emphasize? What are you looking to hide? And then begin to take those steps, rather than just buying the tree and buying whatever's on sale, and heaven forbid, buying whatever's in bloom, because as soon as you get it home, it's not blooming anymore. Think in terms of the bigger picture and how plants, either in the ground or in a container, are going to work for you in your living space.
One of the things you'll notice at any public garden is there's a huge variety of places to sit, or relax in this case, which only makes sense because if you're charging admission, you have to manage all that foot traffic too. But it's also good design.
An attractive seating wall can be a destination that leads you to the end of a garden path. A well-placed bench can signal a spot where you're meant to stop and take in a particular view or certain detail. Or patio chairs can simply be an opportunity to relax and enjoy the garden. That's another tip you can take away from the big botanical gardens. Use seating in the landscape intentionally and let the furniture itself make a statement. We found a way to make our favorite garden chair ourselves, with minimal cost, minimal skill required, and maximum results. Our DIY guy, Todd Brock, shows us how.
You know, really good looking garden furniture can make a statement in any landscape. But the thing is, a lot of what you find in the stores is either crazy expensive or it's kind of generic looking and really not that attractive. So we found a lawn chair that we think is perfect in any style garden, surprisingly inexpensive. And it's easy enough to build that anybody can do this. It's called the Wave Hill Chair, named after the 28-acre public garden overlooking the Hudson River in New York. It's based on a design by a famous Dutch architect in the early 1900s, with the style being modified in the 60s to be a stripped-down, almost craftsman alternative to the more commonly seen Adirondack chair. So this is all the wood we're going to need to build one chair, less than $50 total. And it's really basic stuff. Just a few lengths of 2x2, a little bit of 1x4 board lumber, and a little bit of 1x8. This is just select white pine. What that means is there's very few knots in it, and it comes really straight, really easy to work with. It's ready to go. We could have used reclaimed lumber just to try to keep the cost down on this project. The thing about reclaimed wood is it might have nails, it's going to have splinters, and it probably won't be very straight to work with, and that's just going to make the project harder. So we bought new. Now, we didn't use pressure treated wood just because we don't want the chemicals that are associated with waterproofing wood out in our landscape. But if you like cedar or if you like redwood, those will hold up all by themselves out in the elements, and they're going to look great too. The first step is to make your cuts. We have a link on our website so you can buy the same plans we did, and you'll find the exact dimensions there. But we're going to end up with 4 small piles of 2x2s, 3 sets of braces, and a pair of lower supports, and 7 pieces of the board lumber. We used a miter saw, which is ideal for making quick and perfectly straight cuts through small pieces of lumber like this. You can freehand it with a circular saw, but this tool speeds everything up and lets you fly through the cuts assembly line style. I hit everything lightly with a sander, just to smooth down the cut edges and any sharp corners. It's easier to do this now to each of the pieces rather than crawling all over the assembled chair. So our plans refer to the front, middle, and rear braces of our chair as A, B, and C. Now I could take a pencil and label all my pieces, but what I don't want to have to do is worry about those pencil marks in the finished chair. So I'm just going to separate all my pieces into piles and then pay a lot of attention as I build to make sure I keep those piles separate, A, B, C. So the next thing for us to do is to put these braces together. And to do that, we're going to use screws instead of nails. We could use a hammer and nails. That's going to require a lot of beating and banging on the wood. We'll end up damaging this lumber, and we don't want that. So these deck screws are made for exterior use. These are 2.5 inches long. That's long enough to go all the way through the first piece of wood, most of the way into the second. I'm not making the screws as tight as I can right away. I'm leaving some play so I can make adjustments as needed. Once everything is complete and I know it all lines up correctly, I'll go back and tighten all the screws down by hand. The plans specify how to keep the proper spacing between pieces as you build the braces. Measure and mark the lumber with a speed square for a straight line to use as a guide. It's okay, these pencil lines will be hidden. And build on a flat surface to keep everything level and flush. Now, as you build, you definitely want to drill pilot holes, and that's just a starter hole for each of the screws. The hole shouldn't be a big one. You want it to be about the same diameter of the screw itself, minus the threads. That just gives the threads some wood to catch onto, and it keeps your wood from splitting as you drive the screw. So with the framework of the chair done, we're going to move on to adding the backrest, the seat itself, and the armrests. We're using these thinner pieces of wood, so we also need to change the screw size. The plans call for 3 different screw sizes to make sure you're not going through these thinner pieces of wood. So follow the plans and make sure that you're using the right screw at the right step. Now, if your chairs are going to live outside and see any kind of weather, you need to finish them appropriately. You've got lots of options for that. You can do exterior grade house paint, any color you want. Deck stain would work well. Or if you like this natural wood tone, you can use a clear water seal. This is all there is to it though. These are easy to build, they're inexpensive, they're lightweight, they've got a clean line that goes with any landscape, and they are all kinds of comfortable. Who do you have to know to get an iced tea around here?
Just as with his public garden at Chanticleer, Dan thinks about the home garden he shares with Peggy Ann as a place that's meant to be explored. In fact, the couple has made it a nightly ritual.
In the far reaches of our garden, I have a few little secret areas. They're not so much secret as they aren't initially recognized. Little gates and little paths that lead you down these secret gardens, these woodland walks. They're a throwback to my childhood. That's one of my most strong childhood memories of a garden. It's not the garden, it's the woods. It's the secret woods. It's getting lost in the woods and finding your path and the discoveries you make when you're on the trail in the woods. And as an adult, as a garden designer, even if it's out in the open in a public garden, I still want your garden experience to be a bit of a journey with little surprises and little elements that catch you and lead you on.
I think that this garden makes me feel whole because it's where we spend our time and it's where we begin and end our day. It's what we do in our free time. It's, you know, maybe in a way it's like our church. Maybe we just feel so secure here, like this is our nest and, you know, we are safe and we are happy and comfortable and warm, and maybe that is like going to church. You know, like at the end of the day when we take our walk, you know, everybody's so busy in their daily lives that it's easy to forget to be grateful. But by taking the walk at night before we go in at the end of the evening, that's when we do take time to remember about how grateful we are. And maybe that's like a prayer.
The best part of my work is seeing people make a connection with plants. Now, one might say visitors come to a garden to see plants, of course, and they see benches and they see water features. But when you see a guest make a connection with a plant, they smell it, they touch it, they experience it for the first time. You see it in their faces. It's pretty wonderful. It's seeing people make that connection with plants and gardens. I love to travel and see new places and meet new people, but I love to come home. And Peggy's made that much more apparent to me. It's not just the person, but it's the persona and what we do in the garden together. That's my connection. That grounds me. I can tackle anything else in life if I know that I can come back to the garden.
Gardening is often described as a labor of love. And for most of us, there is definitely a lot of love involved. Love of plants, love of nature, love of the earth. To have any success at all in the garden, you have to put love in. And if you do it long enough, if you tend to the soil and don't force things to grow where they don't want to, and weather a few storms, and patiently let nature take its course, sometimes love is exactly what you'll get out of the garden too. We hope you've enjoyed meeting Dan and Peggy Ann today. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Joe Lample, and we'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World.